All right, welcome. We've got Tyler Vega with us today. Thank you for joining us, Tyler. How are you doing?
Excellent, thank you.
So Tyler is going to be running for Congress in Washington's CD2 and CD6. Can you explain both of those?
Yeah, that's a question that's going to come up a lot. Might as well get straight to it.
Mm-hmm.
The short answer, and the answer is quite long, but the short answer is that I'm not actually intending to beat Rick Larson in the primary, nor Kilmer in the general. My aim is to win a lawsuit. So I'm running actually so that I can sign off as a plaintiff in the lawsuit and increase the size of the House of Representatives, and then we'll outvote those guys once we get all of us elected. So if I get the job, that's great, and if we happen to win on the ground in a rigged system, all the better. But the point is to fix the real problem, which is the connection between the people and the government.
Wonderful. So you mentioned that part of it is the more representative government. I know Brian actually wanted to speak to you a little bit more about that and what that means and how you're going about that, something with the article first. Brian, do you want to go ahead and get into that right away, since it's one of the main reasons why Tyler is
So so thank you for coming, Tyler. First
Absolutely.
off, welcome. And my name's Brian Cheeseman. I'm Washington Bernie Kratz outreach director. And it says in your platform that you're having to do with something in the article, the first, and Laverne versus, I'm not sure who it's versus, but that whole court case in the federal courts. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. Laverne versus House of Representatives is, Eugene Laverne he wrote the book on this subject literally, and is suing the House of Representatives for representation. Again, this is a very long story, but in this world, it has to be put very shortly. So the short version is that when the Constitution was written, there was a huge debate over representation. We had just fought a war over representation, and the people wanted it done right, and it took some time to do that. And so they all got together, figured out what they really wanted to do. There were some mistakes made. If you can imagine the horsemen ride out from Philly or wherever they were meeting at New York actually, and go to all the states to get this document promulgated. Ratified is another way of saying that. And that did happen. But in the meantime, the White House gets burned down when the British come back. So long story short, it never actualized. The agreement about how the government would remain a people's democracy was never put into actuation. And so since 1911, we've had a House of Representatives, which is the people's representation in the government, capped at 435 people. Basically, those 435 people have the entire voice of the people in our entire government. We have no other voice. Our president doesn't speak for us, nor does the judicial branch. These people, that's not their job. The House is the balance for the government and the thing that keeps it in balance. Why do you think we have a president that doesn't give a shit about anything? It's because he's not afraid. The checks and balances system that our government is built on puts the House in a position to check the president. The second paragraph of the Constitution reads, "For the House shall have sole power of impeachment." And without that checking him, he's just this rampant monkey fool that can do whatever he wants, and it's crazy. So y'all should get me elected so that I can impeach him, and among other things. But really, I just.
So what is our representation at right now, though?
Well, you mean numbers wise? It's like Washington State, I think. In my district, it's that one guy, Derek Kilmer, represents about 450,000 people. Likewise, in both CD2 and CD6, I think everywhere in the state of Washington, it's about 400,000 people represented by one single human who basically.
Wow, that's amazing. So to be reasonable, right? What should it be at?
Well, I mean, the Constitution was ratified to say that it should be one for every 50,000 people. And that's what the lawsuit literally says. The strict letter of the law is something like, for the first 20,000, you get one rep. For the second 30,000, you get two reps. Everybody gets at least one, and beyond 50, you get one for every 50,000 people. So that it would literally.
So it would actually change over to a representative government in that aspect.
Correct.
A little bit more so, right?
Yeah. I mean, more as a little bit of an understatement. We don't have a representative democracy. We have, as they feared, an oligarchy. You call it an oligarchy, you call it an aristocracy, whatever you want to call it, but it's not a representative democracy currently. And we do have the power to change it. And that's why I'm running for House.
Awesome. Thank you.
So
Thank you.
it's currently at 1 for every 400,000, and if we had 1 for every 50,000, that would be 8 per existing congressional district. 8 representatives instead of 1.
Effectively, that's an accurate statement. Yeah. So and then if you can imagine what that would do if we got all these people elected, we would suddenly have a supermajority in the House of Representatives, and the people would suddenly have a voice in the government. We could literally outvote the neoliberals and the Republicans just by getting me and Tambourine and Dorothy and Sarah and all the people who have shown up as leaders within our community would suddenly have a shot, and we would have the ability to do the things that we want to do. We would pass legislation that all the people agree on. Single payer would be a done deal after that went through.
Wouldn't it make it a lot harder for gerrymandering and the corruption that we have in the system right now? Wouldn't it be harder for them to control that kind of stuff?
That's the whole point. The reason why our forefathers put this in the Constitution was because they're like, hey, look, if a couple hundred people are in control of all this stuff, they're going to get bought. That's the way it works. We've seen it before. We're going to see it again. And the only thing that can check that is the power of the people and the breadth of diversity. The only thing that can check greed is this concept of democracy, so that you use the people as a way to distill the right course of action. And without it, you're toast. You're going down the wrong path. And here we are, right where they thought we'd be, because, I mean, I don't want to go too far off into the weeds on this one, but you get my point.
Yeah.
I
think we do. Thank you very much.
So that was one major platform that you're running on. And just before we get through, Courtney has a beautiful list that we would like to have her go through with you. But before we do that, you have a top 2 on that, what you're really running for. Do you want to talk about the second platform that you are running on?
I mean, it's really single payer. There are. What are the top 2? That's funny you should say top 2, because one of them is actually the top 2 primary itself is a huge problem that is also something that's on my list. But as far as my 2 main planks, it's really single payer and Article the First. I think everybody probably in this audience knows what single payer is. If you don't, good time to figure it out. Socialized healthcare. We want people to be able to go to the doctor and.
Right. So we're talking about that, and Courtney's pulling up her list. There's been a lot of discussion on word use, on whether single payer or universal health care. And so there's concern with just using single payer. So I just want to use this as an educational piece. So universal health care is really the name we want to get behind. Apparently in Washington State, there's some talk about a single payer they want to get behind for Medicaid, but that means that they actually want to make the Medicaid private. So we want to watch our use, especially here for single payer, because they want to turn it into a private Medicaid for Washington State, which, as we know, turning something private doesn't necessarily represent the whole of the people.
Yeah, no, I hear you. That literally put the problem back into the situation in another form.
Exactly. So Courtney, are you ready with our list? So go ahead and take that part away.
I am. All right, Tyler. We have a list that we prepared through our Washington Bernie Kratz Coalition Facebook group, where we asked from amongst our members for suggestions on things that should be put back into the control of the government, so socialized. And we're wondering on this list which ones you agree with or would disagree with and why. So as I go through the list, if you can just say private or socialized, and then if there's a brief explanation to anything that you would disagree with. So prisons.
Oh, yeah, got to be public.
Okay, schools.
Public. Public and private. That has to be both.
Okay. With that, is that a difference between higher education and primary education, or is that within the K through 12 system as well?
Should be both. Should be, yeah, public and private option all throughout.
Okay, when you say private, is that something like parochial schools, or is that also something along the line of charter schools?
I mean, I'm just saying that charter schools is too complicated. I'm just saying that you can't mandate there not being private schools. So we need to have a public option all the way throughout, and then let the private sector do whatever they do. It's not the government's job to deal with that.
Okay. Healthcare.
Public. Public.
Postal service.
Public.
Utilities.
Public.
Water.
Public.
Banks.
Ideally public. Yeah. I think that, you can't get rid of private either, but definitely needs to be a public option.
Okay. And then public lands.
Yep.
And natural resources.
Yep.
Infrastructure.
Yep. That's actually the whole point of the government.
Mm-hmm. Internet cell service. And you can address
open to it. I've never really thought of it. What would that look like? Yeah, I would be in favor of a public option on internet and phone communications. Absolutely, I would be.
Okay. Social Security.
Yep, public.
Military. Okay. Military and its associated industrial complex.
Got to be public.
Foster care.
Definitely has to be public. I think. Yeah, I don't know how you would address the question of private. I think private exists, again, private sector doing what the private sector does, not the government's job to deal with that, but definitely has to have a public option.
Okay. And then mass transit, as in buses?
Yeah, required. Public.
Ferries?
Yep.
Railways?
Yep.
Airways?
Sure, if we could pull it off. I mean, we're going to need to take some leaps forward to be able to play at that level, but absolutely be ideal.
Libraries?
Yeah, for sure.
Childcare?
Ideally, yeah, absolutely.
Space exploration?
Yeah, I love this conversation. This is great.
Scientific funding?
Yeah, definitely.
Elections?
Yep. What a concept.
First responders?
Yeah.
Social services?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Veterans Administration?
Yeah.
Community housing?
Mm-hmm.
And then what are your thoughts on the universal basic income?
Yeah, again, I mean, I think that would be a level of something to strive for, a level of that to me is would be a highly evolved state of humankind if we could get to that level. And I think that is within our grasp for the first time, perhaps in history. We can get to that point where people don't need to fear for their safety in that basic way, and they can relax and settle in and figure out what their direction is, knowing that they're going to be able to eat and have shelter and have the basics covered.
Good. And then as a possible stepping stone in that direction, would you be interested in supporting a caregiver's basic income in which parents or a parent of young children or the caregiver for elderly parents or a sick family member can receive benefits as a care provider, even if it's within their own home, instead of so if I wanted to stay home with my kids, instead of paying the child care providers system on behalf of my child, allow my family to have that, and then also those years of caregiving can be also applied to Social Security, or some new format can be developed, but whatever credit people get for working, those caregiver years are honored.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it sounds almost utopic to me. And of course, the big conversation at the end of the day for all these things, literally from top to bottom, is how you're going to pay for it. And we actually are in a position to do that and could move towards that if we just got to kind of put the people back in the driver's seat. So it really comes back to article the first question, because how are you going to do that when when our system naturally has the more selfish people rise to the top in every sector? How are you going to implement changes that support the people on the quote unquote bottom? And the only way you're going to do that is through the House of Representatives. So the answer to all those questions is yes. And how are we going to pay for it? There's two ways. We're going to A, put the people back in the driver's seat, and B, you have to deal with this looming what do they call it, the 500-pound gorilla of the military industrial complex, because where are all those resources going that should really be supporting a mother with twin newborns or an adult who just needs to take care of their ailing parents? Where are all those resources going? I hate to break it to you, but not break it to you, but it's blowing people up, and we don't need to do that anymore. We're the wealthiest and most powerful country the world has ever known, and there's every reason why we can do all those things.
So that leads me to ask next, in reference to what you mentioned, taxes, and then on your vetting form, questionnaire, you mentioned that you lean libertarian, verging on Republican on taxation. You do support a lot of socialized aspects of our community, and so my thoughts on when I hear libertarian, I think of personal liberty and no regulation, and then when I think Republican, I think no taxes, low taxes, right. Don't tax the wealthy. So how do you socialize all those things you're willing to socialize? How do you balance your willingness to socialize with your with what I imagine with the words you use describing your tax position?
Yeah, and I appreciate the question. First of all, I was raised in a very progressive family, but self-identifying as a libertarian because my stepfather actually is and was a libertarian minister, from the other side of libertarianism. And the reason that was the case is because, when I was a youngster, I probably like 10 or 11, I asked him, hey, what does that mean? What does that mean? I never heard of that. And he says, well, the core principle is really just that you do what you want and you don't let people control what you're doing, as long as you're not hurting anybody, as long as you're not, messing with somebody else's business. You can kind of, the idea is that you can do what you want. This is this whole American dream, the idea is that we're free as long as we're not in somebody else's business. And so that's the core of the libertarian principle. Now that differs somewhat from the party and the current climate. Now libertarian is kind of like Republican light. But I really adhere to that principle, and I believe that that to the degree that we can, we should practice that principle. In this age, we can't do that very well. So if you take it from like a green meets libertarian perspective, sure, let the corporation kind of be free and do what they need to do as long as they're not actually hurting the people around them. But that includes the environment, that includes the economy, that includes the working class that they're employing actually have to do their job. And so when you take it to the level of small business, sure, decrease your amount of taxation and the amount of restrictive governing on that, so long as it's not interfering with other people's right to live. And with taxation, it gets real sticky, especially in conversations with the right, because even though I claim that, I am pretty far left. And you can't win those conversations unless you figure out where the money, A, is going to come from, and B, where it was going in the first place. And so you get back to the military industrial complex. So if you're going to actually be a socialist and lean right on taxation, you have to fill that gap. And the answer to that is you have to address that issue, the fact that we're wasting literally half of our budget on insane negative expenditures. Redirecting of that could very easily and very quickly solve these problems. Not that big a deal to universal basic income. Not that big a deal if you were to get transparency and accountability with the United States military. Suddenly the conversation about paying for that gets real easy, real fast. And suddenly you don't have to tax the small business owners, the people that, like my boss, who's really barely making it and working 70 hours a week. He doesn't need more taxes either, any more than I do or you do. How do you fix that? You need to create integrity within our armed forces.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So we have another question lined up. We found it on Facebook, and there was concern about your stand on guns. So the vetting form, let's see, sorry, I was so intent on your answer, I didn't prep for the next question. Okay, oh no, that's a big stick. I do remember some of it was that you tend to, the right to bear arms shall not be infringed upon, quite literally. And so with, that's one part of the Second Amendment. It also talks about a well-regulated militia. So is there any, how do they temper, those statements temper each other? How do you resolve those?
Well, the contextually, yeah, first of all, pretty literal. And a lot of this comes from striving to, being a far left candidate, especially, and wanting to reach right. I always been trying to figure out what's going on in the brains of these fellow citizens who think very differently. And time and time again, it comes back to these, kind of crazy conversations that nobody really wants to have in public, but everybody I've had it with are relatively serious about. And, the right to keep and bear arms was put in place basically because our asses were saved by the regular people defending themselves. That's how this country was formed. Conversation of representation, if all that was the same conversation. Look, might makes right in our world. The big, strong, and powerful are what are going to make the decisions. And so a quote unquote well-regulated militia and the right to keep and bear arms was a right provided to us, kind of like the right to peaceably assemble, to defend our own sovereignty. And so when they said not be infringed upon, and when I speak to people on the right about this issue, they're talking about how, for example, common sense gun control does infringe upon their rights. It kind of moves the bar inwards, and there's a lot of fear on the right about that because give an inch, take a mile is what happens, and said to happen, and does happen. And, you look at our rights slowly eroding away at every stage. Look at how our rights are being taken away on the issue of peaceable protest, for example. And so the Constitution was written with that in mind, knowing that it would go the way it went. Very wise and fallible humans got together to write this document, and they knew exactly how it was going to go. Time and time again, the more history I study, I'm like, wow, they knew exactly where we were going, and they put the antidote in the texts, knowing that we would need to, at some point, to rise up and figure it out and fix it after it got broken. And so the shall not be infringed upon, I choose literal, basically to open a dialogue with the right and in understanding. I'm not going on there, and I don't intend to go there, unless literally aliens invade, unless we're literally dealing with that, like that's at that point, yes, I'm down and I'm going and I'm all in. But in the meantime, very much pacifist and would, sooner turn the other cheek than draw on fire. But I get the right, and I respect the right, and I want them to have that right, regardless of how irrational the fear may be. And the more I think about these quote unquote irrational fears, the more I'm like, well, yeah, that's actually plausible, and it was plausible in the 1700s. And look at what happened, right? The White House was burned down, and it did stop us from actualizing our Constitution, resulting in lacking democracy. That both sides of that amendment, a well-regulated militia and the right to keep and bear arms, could have stopped that if we had a better regulated militia at that time. Well, what about right now? So if you want to, I don't think they balance each other out so much. What is a well-regulated militia implies that we, the people, would be would be more organized and cooperating better. And we would know who was armed around us, and we would have strategies in place for if something were to go down, how we would deal with that. I like that idea. I don't know that I'm going to put my energy there, but I think that's an appropriate, I think that the right should be looking at that side of the amendment and be more transparent. And I think that the left should be taking the right seriously on this. I think that we on the left really need to be talking to these, instead of referring to them as wingnuts, as they refer to us as whatever, libtards or whatever, talking about, what about the need for a well-regulated militia? I mean, I think, that's within reason. These are intelligent humans who are making a point that we really should listen to. Does that answer your question, Courtney?
Yes. And then the other aspect of the question that came up was, with all the gun violence in America, how do we address that if it's not through gun control? Do you see it as there are countries that have as high a ratio of guns to people that don't have the violence that we do? So what then? Yeah,
exactly. And I mean, it's a perfect example that, in my book, the gun control laws are a Band-Aid on a gangrenous, festering wound that does actually make it a little bit better. It's more like a Band-Aid with Vicodin and morphine in it, and it slaps it on there. It makes it a little better. It does make it better. The numbers go down. But at the same time, you erode the rights. You take the guns out of the law-abiding citizens' hands and leave them in the hands of people who are not going to use them. So all kinds of other problems like that. And so if you look at the other countries that have these numbers about, who does have guns, but they have less violence than us, you look below the surface and you'll see that they have other things in place that are not that are not causing problems. I mean, for example, if our young parents in the lower class weren't struggling to make ends meet and oftentimes giving up, and if our fathers, our quote unquote deadbeat dads, weren't driven away by the impossibility of the situation, maybe you don't have some of these problems of youngsters growing up without role models, and their only role model is Master Chief and a battle rifle. Like that is happening in our world, where our kids are growing up with more guidance from Halo 3 than from their own fathers. And that's a systemic problem that is way, 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 way deeper than guns. So my solution to that is to look at these other things that we talked about. What about a universal basic income? What about giving fathers the right to stay with their children, when they want to? I mean, why not solve the problem that way? Because that will solve the problem. A lot of those kids, all they really needed was to be spanked at the right time, in my humble opinion. Forgive me for saying that out loud as a candidate, and I know I'll get my ass kicked for that later. But the cold hard truth is that we are warriors. I was born a warrior and will always be that. And the only thing that changes me from that crazy kid that bombed the high school was that I had good role models and I was able to make mistakes and I had somebody correct me. So don't look at it like, Ty is against gun control. Not that I'm against control. I just don't think it's the problem. That's not the issue. We're not addressing the issue when we talk about gun control. Got to go way, way, way deeper.
So you propose that by making sure people don't feel economic crisis, that we might be able to reduce gun violence?
Yeah, and in a nutshell, yeah. I mean, it's not. That's a beautiful way of putting it. And the answer is, yes, I do believe that is a better way to solve it than gun control.
Okay. Well, thank you. We've covered the planned questions, the prepared ones.
Well, we have a question in the audience on YouTube from Oz. So he was actually asking about should automation be regulated? So we're, coming of age where automation will be taking over a lot of our workforce, or the possibilities of that. what kind of regulations, if any, do you think we should look at trying to have in place? Anything you would get behind?
I don't think it's automation is coming whether you like it or not. And then this whole concept of, the robots taking over the jobs in principle, I actually support that. But it comes along with this whole slew of other things. I would like it if the robots actually did do more of the jobs and the people had more time to do the things that really called to them as a result of that. So again, it's a symptom versus problem question for me. The symptom is that the workers are losing their jobs and people are getting stuck in situations that suck, and the robots are getting blamed for that. But the real problem isn't that the robots are doing the jobs. It's more the problem is that there's no catch-all for the people to then find their way into something better. Because if I'm doing a job that a robot can do, in a perfect world, I would hand that off to the robot, and then I would graduate into something that was a little bit better for society and humanity. I mean, look at members of this team who are able to spend, through whatever means, regardless of the means, who are able to spend their time making the world a better place. Why couldn't we turn that situation and instead of fighting against the robots taking over the world, train that workforce to make the robots better robots and have them perhaps learn to program the robots? I don't know. I mean, we're going to get into a whole conversation about the matrix here that's pretty dangerous. But in general, I don't think that the problem on the surface is the way to attack the problem. I think we need to get deeper than that.
Wonderful. So can you go into, I know that you have been active in your community for a long time. I would like to know, some of the things you have done that you might be more standout, nonprofit work, political work. We know personally, but we want everybody else to know kind of what you've been doing out in the community regarding helping.
Yeah, a lot of ways I can answer that. Well, God, where to start?
I'm sorry, but that's awesome that you have to say that because there's so much. So I appreciate that. Go ahead.
Okay, so it's also it's unusual to field a question to talk about myself in that way. So I'm trying to organize my thoughts in a good way. An example of how I go about making change on a day-to-day basis is what comes to mind. There are two of them. One is I this morning I left my car and I looked kind of in the backseat window as I was on my way in, and my first voice pops in my head is like, "Damn, Ty, your car is messy." It's insane in there, and the reason it's messy is because it's full of there's like 40 computers in there right now. But the reason there's 40 computers is in there is because I'm going to rebuild them, and I'm trying to have one on hand, literally that's wiped clean, fresh, and ready to rock that I can literally hand out on the street. Because in this day and age, we can solve a bunch of problems with education, and so I believe that if you can get an unrestricted, breakable, thrashable laptop in the hand of a kid, you can plant the seed for a senator in the future who's going to change the world or whatever. It doesn't matter what them to follow their path. And so I choose to, these days, I spend a lot of less time out. I'm not at the rallies as much as I'd like to be, but I am packing around empowerment tools at every moment, and every spare moment I'm fixing them, harvesting them, because we got to get a lot of leftovers at my work and trying to move them along to the next place. So on that's kind of the microcosm of how I've currently tried to make proactive change. And I know it doesn't sound very political, but if you can imagine what these kids will grow up to do, and you guys are using this technology to interview me right now, like that kind of thing. Just getting these kids to be able to master that, or not just kids, adults. I'm totally happy to whoever, it doesn't matter to me. And these aren't, there's not a lot of expenditure here. These are old rigs that are using open source software and whatnot. And then the other example that comes to mind is less common in my current life. I'm a father now and getting older and doing the land-based thing. But back in the day, I was a full-time activist, and I spent a lot of time living in trees to try and make change. And so if people are curious as to who I am and where I come from, I'm the kind of guy that would be hanging in a tree so that it wouldn't get cut down to try and battle climate change. And so there's this whole rich chapter of my life where that was kind of the story. I was also trying to make it and surviving, spending time on the streets and doing whatever I had to do to get by, where the focus was to actually do something that would actually make a difference. And when I think back to all of my all the things that I've offered to the people, one of the things that stands out in my memory is that there are a dozen old growth redwoods that still stand, and they probably will stand for our lifetimes. And that kind of thing really matters, even though it seems like a small thing in the grand scheme of battling climate change, that a dozen trees might still stand. In symbolically speaking, that is a beautiful thing that I'd like to see more of that. I would like to see, I'd like to see people so well supported that when it was really time to stop our backyard from getting mowed down, and it was being done for the wrong reasons by the wrong people in the wrong ways, that we would just stop it.
Thank you. So there is a bill out there right now that is trying to give the military the rights to decide what to do with our land here in Washington State. How do you feel about that? And what do you think we can do to help stop that action, if that's what you...
Yeah, well, you might actually have to get me elected to stop that one. The second, again, back to the Constitution, the Congress shall be responsible for the Navy. The people need to be put back in the driver's seat. And everybody saw that post, and everybody's like, what, that is just, fuck, come on, are you serious? And that is the world we live in. And that is allowed to happen because we have no voice. All those people cry out in protest, and our right to protest is being eroded away. And we literally have, I can't even think of a good way to stop that. Sure, and don't take this the wrong way. Please do write your representative. Please do protest. Please do try to stop these things. But until that representative actually represents you, we need to dig deeper for a better solution. And that guy does not represent you. That's not what's going on here. We need to fix that, and we actually have a way to fix it now. So it's time to get it together and do this.
So kind of an extension of kind of that. So within your first year of being in Congress, what are some of your plans on either proposing legislation or signing on to certain legislations, or anything standing out that you will get on the ground running behind?
Yeah, well, I mean, if it goes, in a perfect world, this would go in such a way that, that we would have a lot of adjustment to do right in that first little bit. I mean, I'd like to, the warrior in me just wants to get up and straight up impeach right now, because, for the House shall have sole power of impeachment, right? Let's bam, knock two of them out. Laverne versus House, actually, the lawsuit itself takes Paul Ryan out of the picture. The language of the, he's the third in line. So if you wanted to actually impeach your way through the executive branch of the government, you'd have to either impeach all three of them, or in this case, we have a third less work to do because Laverne versus House eliminates Paul Ryan from the equation. And so, the warrior in me would say, let's start there, and along with that, and dealing with those things. But that's pretty maverick stuff. We're talking about the X-Wing fighter version. From a more balanced perspective, you would start with single payer, and you would probably immediately move to introducing the concept of a universal basic income, not necessarily, because, it's not, okay, if the House was suddenly multiplied by a factor of 8, and we did actually elect all these people, Dorothy, Sarah, Tambourine, and all these people running for Senate suddenly they're all in the House. Suddenly we got all of them in the House. Then it's a game changer, because UBI is getting through the House, period. And everybody knows about it right now. That's going to happen. If by some trick of fate, I beat Rick Larson and am elected as a voice in the wilderness, and it's me and Pramila and one of the 3 power women, or even all 3 of them, and we're a minority voice, then you're talking about a more strategic approach. And you still introduce things like UBI so that they become a topic of conversation, with the hope that they will be enacted within our lifetimes, like Bernie Sanders did. Suddenly everybody knows we're renaming single payer universal healthcare. Everybody knows what that means now, and that is the way it will change, through consciousness. Now, again, my pitch is that we need the people back in the House, at which point we can rock that. We can take it and it's not even stuffing it down the throats anymore, because at that point it's just accepting that that's the will of the people. That's what people really want. Because, you look across this country, there are a lot of people who need that and would really benefit from that. So why wouldn't they vote for it? They'd be like, yeah, that's what we want. And we're going to vote for somebody who's going to give me that, because that's what I need to make my life work. And my life is going to make other people's lives work better, because that's going to work. Pretty straightforward in theory. And it's not easy, but at least we have hope and a plan.
So as far as, economy and how to, with automation coming in, some other ways that we could look at building up our economy, and some great talk out there is with the hemp industry, and how some of those regulations are opening up. Can you go into a bit of your thoughts on hemp?
Yeah, well, it should be nice to get this conversation going, figure out we haven't talked about governor yet. So we need to figure out who's going to run for governor in 2020. Industrial hemp is the way, the truth, and the light for economics. It solves so many of our problems. We're talking about climate change problems, economic problems. We're talking about jobs problems. Across the board. And if you dig below that to look at what the problem is, the illegalization of these things, and this war on drugs that was really a war on colored people. If you want to really break it down, that's what was really going on there. So if you get to the root of the problem and pretend like, how do you say it in logic class? You would say, except for the moment that we solve the problem and that it is legal. Suddenly you have all the ability to create infrastructure, create jobs, create revenue, solve the climate problem, solve the fossil fuels problem. And all you got to do is do the right thing in the first place. And, these things are going to take time. It's not easy. There's nothing easy about it. You're going to need entrepreneurs. You're going to need capital. You're going to need the right and the left meeting up and matching. And so we can get on the same page. We can really do that. It's already legal here, but it's not easy. So the short answer to your question is yes. I've done what I can to move this concept forward in our state. It's limited. We have to pick our battles. But there is legislation happening now around these things, and the champions of that are kind of on my radar. And that's where I don't know that I would be so much spearheading or championing that. I might. I mean, if there was time, I absolutely would. In the knowledge that you have to pick your battles, I'm really, really after this representation thing. I don't think you can fix anything else until you fix that. I think you got to fix it first. So if we got to the point where that was under control, which is pretty pipe dreamy, I'm not getting my hopes up that that's going to be solved anytime soon. I would like to, within my lifetime, if I'm lucky, and I'm okay waiting till after I die to deal with it, as long as it gets dealt with, kind of a thing. But yeah, if we got that under control, and suddenly the people were engaged, and civics, suddenly we had civics back in the high school, for example, I would absolutely be The next thing on my list would be industrial hemp, especially in Washington, but not just Washington, all across the country. Legalizing it federally makes so much sense. And the only reason it's not is these basic concepts of greed. And once again, we get back to the House of Representatives, because there's only one way you can check greed, and that's with this distillation process of the people and the concept of a republican democracy.
All right. So talking about greed, we talk about money and politics. It's hand in hand. So, of course, we're very adamant about getting behind candidates who won't be taking any corporate money. And we have discussions of, super PACs, of course. What is your stance on raising funds for your campaign? I was able, we go on and looking on your website, and I love your stance. So can you please go into that?
Yeah, well, we'll be taking any money. First of all, money is tricky stuff, and I'm, even at the age of 40, still learning how to deal with it in a good way and accept that it is a requisite thing. But it arguably, but my stance is that it's a rigged system, and the more you can do stuff in the spirit of doing it right, the better. And so I'm not I'm not accepting any money. I won't take any money, and I'm also not going to spend any money. I'm not going to ruin my life again over running for office in a rigged system. So I want to win in that other way that I've been speaking of in this lawsuit, and I will probably raise money to pay a lawyer to handle that, and I might raise money to pay the filing fee. But as of right now, I'm not taking any money. I don't want money. I want people to keep their money and spend it on the things that they need. People don't have money. People are broke. I'm broke. That's the overarching reality and the problem. That's why people won't run. I can't get somebody to run in CD6 or CD2. I don't want to do it. Like, I'm not into it. So much rather if somebody else would do it, so I could step back and support them. And then I could actually spend money on that campaign, because, it would suddenly be viable to do so. But since there's nobody to run because they're broke, I don't want you to give me your money, especially not to, put on a plastic yard sign with my name on it. It makes me want to retch, no interest whatsoever in taking your hard-earned money and turning it into that. That's disgusting. So it's a whole different conversation in a way. No, I'm not taking any corporate money. I don't want anything that they have to offer, and I don't want the yard signs, and I would rather you spend your money on stuff good. But on that note, I do need to pay, this is a pay-to-play system, and it is going to cost me money to run for office, and I don't have the money. So I would like to get signatures. And now, of course, I'd rather you get signatures for I-1600. So if there are people out there gathering signatures for I-1600, I might ask that you carry mine around too, because every signature is worth $1 towards my filing fee. And that's the only expense besides the website that I'm intending to incur. That's a little, it's kind of unrealistic thinking in some ways, but basically my mission is to draw attention to this lawsuit and win this lawsuit. So I don't need to necessarily raise money in the way that the others do. If you want to spend money on politics, send it to Dorothy, send it to Sarah, send it to Tambourine. They're running viable campaigns. They're women in a world that really needs their attention. So I would prefer to channel all that direction and see them win in a rigged system, because they can win in a rigged system. I'm not that I can't. That's not what I want to spend all my time doing. Does that answer your question, Rhonda?
Yeah. So how many signatures do you need to be able to not have to come out of pocket yourself to get on the ballot?
1,774 valid signatures. And generally speaking, it's wise to get twice that, just because, a little error is going to cross them off the list. A lot of people don't know what congressional districts. So I effectively need 2,500 or 3,000 signatures from Congressional District 2 specifically, which is like, from Briar and Mountlake Terrace, where my hood up north through Everett and out to Anacortes, and I think it ends south of Marysville.
And then will you need this for CD6 if
not really? I mean, the CD6 run is really on principle. It is awareness thing, and it's a write-in. So, I mean, I actually will probably gather signatures in CD6 to be registered as a write-in. But again, short of a mass awakening, it's really that one is almost a protest campaign because nobody will do it. I'm going to put my name out there so that people don't have to vote for a person that doesn't represent them. I don't believe that a person should be obliged to vote for Derek Kilmer, even though he has sold them out. I think that they should at least have some candidate that they can put in there. And that's more of my reason for running in CD6. And I actually live in CD6. I don't live in CD2. It's where I come from, and the people I resonate most with, having gone to school there and lived there for the majority of my life. I may actually, thank you. I may actually gather signatures for the write-in process, but that's a later thing, and it's so complicated to talk about that people don't have time, and we'll see about that. It's the same number of signatures.
Wonderful. So we are coming down to the last 10 minutes of this interview. We will be doing a second part as we do try to give enough in the same amount of time for each candidate to look forward. What I'd love to get from you now is you to do your official, I am Tyler Vega, I am running for blah, 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 and a good closing overall statement of your campaign and what you'd like everybody to know about you.
Sure. Well, my name is Tyler Vega. I'm running for Congress, the House of Representatives in Congressional District 2 of Washington State. I will also presumably run in the general as a write-in CD6 unless a miracle takes this. I'm running specifically to draw attention to the court case Laverne versus House of Representatives, and I will be joining the suit to sue the House of Representatives for representation, because the core of the problem that we have in our country is that the people are not involved with their government. What is required is that the House of Representatives be a manageable size, and I mean bigger, not smaller, and that the people be engaged with the government. Otherwise, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And that is the thrust of the campaign.
And where can people find you?
TylerVega.com or Facebook.com/Vega in the House.
What's your Twitter handle?
At Ty Vega for Congress, at Tango Yankee, Victor Echo Golf Alpha, number 4 Congress.
Thank you very much for taking your time out today with us. And we look forward to the second part of this interview, and we'll get that scheduled and get that out as soon as we have that all up and planned. Anybody else want to say anything before we leave today? I think Brian does.
I just want to say that thank you for coming, and thank you for clarifying some of the issues that some of us had. And one thing that I want to know is, do you consider yourself a Bernie-crat?
Absolutely. Yeah, the Bernie-crat, the definition of a Bernie-crat to me is a set of policies that are, for lack of a better word, do you consider yourself a socialist? And I am a socialist and a libertarian, and a socialist in practice and policy, and a libertarian in principle, I think is the most accurate way to say it.
Awesome. Again, thanks so much, Tyler, for coming in and doing this.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for your work.
Nothing but luck with your run, and if there's any help that you need, I hope that we will be able to help you with that.
Great. I appreciate you guys' work a lot. More than maybe you do know, but more than you probably know.
Thank you so much, Tyler. Cool. Okay, we'll see you later. I'm going to stop the live stream right now.